going on, guys? Welcome to Garage 23. Today we're working on our 1990 Nissan Pathfinder, and we're going to be fixing the power steering high pressure line and possibly a water pump slash radiator. So let's get started. So yeah, needless to say, we got a few issues going on with this thing. I mean, it runs, we'll take what we can get. Obviously it hasn't been running for a long time, so there's gonna be some gremlins here and there. Power steering line being one of those issues. Another one, I don't know if you guys could tell, was that little squeaking noise that it was doing while it was idling. That's actually the water pump. And the xterra that we got this motor from was in a pretty decent head-on collision, and the whole radiator support was pushed into the engine. And it looks like the water pump is what took some of that damage. So as you can see from here, the water pump is kind of starting to come apart. The pulley section is starting to walk off the shaft of the water pump. It's not just the pulley itself, it's like the piece that the pulley bolts to. That's coming off of the shaft here, and I think that's what the squeaky noise is this moving around on the shaft. So the crappy part is that this water pump is behind the timing belt for whatever reason. So I don't really want to go through all that trouble. So what we're going to try and do is just hammer this back in and maybe tack it in place. I don't know, it depends how well it holds when we hammer it back in. But to do that, we need a little more space here because I couldn't get a decent swing on a hammer with the radiator in place. But this radiator is kind of crap, so that's gonna be replaced also. Let's get started by draining this thing out. Watch your feet. Let's see if that's enough room. Not really. You guys see the pulley is like wobbling around a little bit just with these light taps. All right, now you can see it's flush with the shaft. That's where it's supposed to be, but it might not stay there. So kind of thinking about just putting a couple tacks on it to keep it from moving around. See if the squeaking stops when it's like that. Very minor squeak. Okay, we got the radiator out and the water drained. Or at least it's in the process of draining now. But we actually had kind of a hard time getting the power steering line because this thing's from 1990, and I guess normal auto parts stores don't really care to carry anything that old anymore. AutoZone didn't have it, neither did O'Reilly's. So we actually lucked out, and one of our local auto parts stores, Penny Pincher Auto Parts, had this in stock, and it was only 40 bucks. So big plus. So if you can't find something in your local area from the normal chains, Google auto parts store in general. There's got to be at least one like smaller kind of auto parts store, and you might have better luck with those. So now we got to get the old one out of here, and it looks like there's a couple of 10mm bolts holding some brackets down there, and then a couple more on the side. So this piece is like sandwiched together, and then when it's together, these little prongs keep it from spreading apart. Kind of a pain, but good attention to detail, I guess. And the little rubber thing just comes off. Now the line should be free. We just got to disconnect it from the pump and the steering box. This thing's old. Okay, before I disconnect the line from the power steering pump, we need to remove the sensor from here. So I'll disconnect that first. And it looks pretty crusty, so let's hope this doesn't get screwed up in the process. And we can't unscrew it because the bracket's in the way. But that's fine, it's cracked loose and didn't get damaged in the process, so that's a win. Now the next thing up is the big bolt on the power steering pump. That pretty much on all Nissans is a 24 mil. And same for the steering box. This whole setup is weird to me. I'm used to a rack, but this little box has an arm that moves back and forth, and that's connected to your wheels, and that's what turns the car. So there's one end. Stop it from leaking a little bit at least. Okay, now for the steering box. She's bleeding. Just take my time while the patient bleeds out, it's fine. Okay, so before we put everything back, we need to make sure these mating surfaces are nice and clean, no like rocks or dirt or anything in between, and where the copper crush washer thing sat on the steering box. And our new line even came with new copper washers, so we're going to use those. One washer on the top and one washer on the bottom. All right, that one's snug down. Now for the other side. Again, clean the banjo bolt and the pump. One on the top, one on the bottom. And our sensor port is pointing right at the battery, so that's cool. So that's gonna have to sit there that way. And then our sensor should go back here. There, so that should work. Not ideal. This peg is supposed to go in that bracket, and that's what's gonna keep the whole entire thing from spinning on you like it was for us when we're trying to remove it. But it doesn't fit that way because this is an engine from an Xterra and doesn't exactly belong in this Pathfinder, but it's the kind of thing you gotta do to make it work, so whatever. Okay, now I just need to put the line back on all the brackets and we should be good. Okay, before you weld on a car, you always want to disconnect the battery. So we're gonna disconnect the negative terminal here. The other issue is the hub that goes on the shaft of this water pump, I don't think is metal. I think it might be aluminum. The magnet sticks to the center portion pretty strongly, so that's pretty clearly metal. But the outside portion, the hub that's like falling off, doesn't seem to be attracted as strong, and it kind of walks toward the center if I let go of the magnet. So that might be why it's coming off, because the aluminum isn't going to hold as strongly as like another piece of steel would. But I think if we try to weld onto the shaft anyway, we can build up like a lip basically around it so that the aluminum won't have any room to walk away from the shaft, and hopefully that'll keep it on. I don't know, it's worth a shot. Actually, before we weld it, we're gonna give it a little cleanup with this grinder. Yeah, it's kind of another way to tell. It seemed like only the middle portion was making sparks. If you grind aluminum, it doesn't make sparks. Only metal does. So it's another sign that this probably isn't, that this probably is made out of aluminum. So it looks pretty good. Still can't really tell if it was aluminum or not. It seemed to weld to the middle part okay. Might change my mind when I see it up close in post, but deal with that later. All right, now we're ready to put the radiator back in. First, we need to put the new radiator hose on because this engine is from a 2004 Nissan Xterra, and this is very much not a 2004 Nissan Xterra. So the lower radiator hose is different because the attachment on the thermostat housing is different. So we had to order this hose, and it's just a matter of slipping it on. We probably need our clamps first. I'm not gonna use the radiator shroud because I'm not leaving that stupid clutch fan on there. And yes, I know the clutch fan's better with the proper shroud, it flows more air, blah, 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 blah. It's stupid, it sounds like a tractor, I hate them. I'm not leaving it on there. Fight me. We're putting electric fans on it later. I had these laying around that were gonna go on the 240, but they're not quite the right size. I want to see if I can find something that fits a little closer. The height is a little too short and the width is a little too wide. The top mounting points line up damn near perfect, so that's great. But the lower mounting points don't line up with anything at all. So we need to figure out something else for that. But I figure there's got to be some other Nissan out there that has E-fans that are closer to this shape, so I'll figure that out later. Another reason why I'm switching to the E-fans is the clutch fan in there is about to explode any time soon. If you can see there's already cracks forming. Maybe just that one crack. Yeah, there's one crack there. And the whole thing in general looks a little stressed, like there's like stress fractures along some of the edges. So I'm not gonna leave that in there. And with the brand new radiator, it should do just fine, even if it doesn't have a shroud. Actually, we need to put the lower bushings on here first from the old radiator. All right, so these little rubber peats go on there just like that. Then we can drop it in. Just gotta make sure the bottom feet line up with the holes in the frame rail, or the radiator support. And put our hoses back on, upper and lower. Almost every extension I have. Stupid clutch fan. Need to bolt the top of the radiator back on. Okay, now we're ready for the coolant and to try and bleed all the air out of it. And this little tool is pretty useful for that. I think I also got this off Amazon. This helps bring the water line up higher than the rest of the engine, so all the bubbles can come out here and not get trapped down there somewhere. All right, now we're ready to put the coolant in. And I always buy concentrate. So if you pay attention at the auto parts store, there's concentrate and there's ready to use. Ready to use already has water mixed into it. And they charge you about the same, sometimes a little more for the ready to use one, which is dumb because they're giving you less product. So I always get concentrate because then you can mix it yourself and you get twice as much. And also you don't have to mix it 50-50. You'll typically get a little bit better performance if you do a 70-30 mix, but it probably differs on the specific brand. But for the most part, the ready-to-use kind is always mixed 50-50. So that'll give you protection. Depending on where you live, the freezing protection might be more important to you. So this is good for negative 34 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 37 C if you're nasty. Or 265 degrees Fahrenheit boilover protection, or 129 degrees C. So we live in Arizona, so we need all the help we can get. So we're gonna do a 70-30 mix to give us 276 degrees of boilover protection. Also keep this away from doggos because they will drink it and they will die. You'll die, you understand? You will die. Run away, you're in danger. So what I typically do to mix it, if you're doing a 50-50 mix, just empty the whole contents into one bucket and then fill it up again and empty that into the same bucket. That'll give you 50-50. If you're doing 70-30, then you want to fill the container up. For a 70-30, you want to fill the container up with water about 3/4 of the way. It'll be slightly less than 3/4, I think. This 3/4 will be 75%. If you want 70%, it'll be a little lower. So slightly below 3/4 of the way, and then dump that in there, and that'll give you about 70-30 mix for your coolant. So let's go mix this. And bring Doggo with us so he doesn't drink the coolant. Come on. All right, so I have my gallon filled with water, and you can check by shining a light into it. As you can see, we're slightly below the 3-quart mark. This was a gallon jug, so duh, it's 3/4 would have been, or yeah, 3/4 would have been 3 quarts. So I filled it up below that, and that should give us about a 70-30 split. Now we empty this into our bucket. Give it a little swish for good luck. And start dumping it in. Okay, so the bubbles stop coming out on their own. So now we're ready to turn the engine on and let that warm up a bit, and then that should get any other air bubbles that are still stuck back there anywhere to come out here, because the water pump will be circulating the coolant around. Also, the reason I poured everything in a bucket is because if you were to just pour the coolant in here and then pour water in here, you don't know how much coolant you need because you don't know how much is still in there. So if you were to just pour the concentrate in here and then fill the rest up with water, then you don't know what kind of ratio you ended up with. And granted, I don't know how bad that is because I've never really heard of anything bad happening if you only put concentrate in here, or it's like a super high percentage, like 80 or 90% or something like that. I think it can start coagulating or something like that. I don't know. I never heard anything bad about it, but I prefer to do things how they're supposed to be done. So that's why I do it in the bucket, because then you have precise control over, well, I guess not that precise, but approximate control over what percentage of coolant that you're going to use. And then you just pour that in here. And because like in this case, we still have, you know, a good, probably like half gallon left over. And so this is already mixed. So if we still need to add more, we can still add more from here instead of just keep filling up with water and end up with who knows how much percent of coolant to water. So that's why I like doing it this way. But now we can start the engine and let it circulate a little bit and see how it goes. Ready for the test drive. Alright, that's a successful test run. Found a couple more things that don't work. I don't think there's going to be any shortage of content coming out of this thing. The clutch master cylinder I think is bad because the clutch pedal keeps getting stuck on the floor and you have to like pull it back up with your foot, and then it seems to work okay. But if you're like holding it too long, it starts to like get stuck in gear too. So I think it's like bleeding off pressure the more you hold it. But if you're just pressing it quickly, it seems to be fine. But I think the seals on the master are going bad, so we need to replace the clutch master cylinder. The shocks are pretty much gone. It's just bouncing around on springs the whole time, so that's another thing we need to take care of. But for the most part, it's drivable. It gets around. The clutch still got some life left in it. This is apparently the original clutch that came on the car, so it's 30 years old and it's not fried yet. It's amazing. That's gonna do it for this episode. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time, and remember, always do your best. All right, so now we empty this.